The US is trying to bring Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukraine's leader Vladimir Zelensky together as it tries to broker a peace deal. Vice President J.D. Vance told Fox News Washington is trying to schedule a time as Trump and Putin prepare to meet at a summit in Alaska later this week.
Vladimir Putin said that he would never sit down with Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, and the president has now got that to change. We're at a point now where we're now trying to figure out, frankly, scheduling and things like that around when these three leaders could sit down and discuss an end to this conflict. Now, what do I think is ultimately going to come out of this? Look, it's actually very simple. If you take where the current line of contact between Russia and Ukraine is, we're going to try to find some negotiated settlement that the Ukrainians and the Russians can live with, where they can live in relative peace, where the killing stops.
We're joined now by Security and European Affairs expert, Professor Anthony Glees from the University of Buckingham. Welcome back to the show. It's lovely to see you again.
Lovely to be with you again.
Thank you. Now, tell us, how important is winning the war or being seen to be winning the war in Ukraine to Putin and his grip on power?
It's absolutely vital for Putin to be able to demonstrate to the Russian people, to his military-industrial complex, that he has come away from the war with a win, and a big win at that. So if he does not come out of any eventual settlement without the 5 bits of Ukrainian territory that he has, that includes Crimea, I think he's in big trouble, and it would probably signal the end of his time in the Kremlin. If, on the other hand, he does get what he wants, we should not forget that it's only part of what he wants. In other words, his aim is to take the whole of Ukraine, and once he's taken the whole of Ukraine, he will carry on with a process he's already started of threatening the post-1997 European NATOs, the Baltic republics, Poland, Hungary, etc., etc. So a big win for Putin is a big disaster for Europe. And it should be a big disaster for the United States of America. Unfortunately, how can I put it politely, the narrow-mindedness of President Trump and J.D. Vance. Vance said just a few hours ago in England, not very far from where I'm speaking to you this evening, that America was now done with funding the war in Ukraine, and basically whatever Putin and Trump decide on in Alaska, it's take it or leave it for Ukraine. And that would be a long-term catastrophe for Europe.
Which is where Europe steps in and steps up, though, right? What more should they be doing?
Well, it's important to realize, despite what Trump says, that it's all American money and so on, the Americans give Ukraine about 30% of the weapons Ukraine needs. The European arm of NATO gives Ukraine another 30% of what it needs. And the Ukrainians themselves are now constructing the remaining 40% of what they need. So there's been a huge uptick in Ukraine's ability to wage this war. However, 2 things that the Americans do have that Ukraine really needs: first of all, intelligence, excellent intelligence, and secondly, Patriot missile systems. So if Trump does not carry on providing those, probably the war would be lost by Zelensky. On the other hand, J.D. Vance made it very clear in England, as long as the Europeans buy American missiles to give to Ukraine, the Americans will be happy for that. But it's a very cynical line taken by J.D. Vance, and it slightly jars with what Trump was saying. Trump talked about we. He said, we have to swap some land. We'll give them something, and the they being Russia, the we being presumably Ukraine and the United States of America. So they're on on one side. But, there's another aspect of the meeting in Alaska that I think is quite important, because Trump has continually said we don't really have to worry about Russia in the United States because we've got this great big beautiful ocean dividing us. In fact, Alaska, as everybody knows, is at its very least only 2.5 miles on the Diomede Islands from Russian territory.
Just ask Sarah Palin. So what happens? I mean, the talk of Putin needing this war to sort of legitimize himself in Russia, would the world be a safer place with Putin out of the Kremlin?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Putin is demented. He's not suicidal, but he's killed or maimed 1 million of his own people, for goodness sake. And we're not sure, but perhaps 40, 50,000 Ukrainians killed, perhaps as many as 500,000 wounded in this war. Putin is a mass killer. The very idea that Zelensky may find himself forced to sit at a table with Putin would, to most people in Britain, I think, be completely unthinkable. During World War II, we would not have sat down with Heinrich Himmler, let alone Adolf Hitler, and talked about peace. So I think that Trump is putting Ukraine in an almost impossible position. And it is short-sighted in the extreme to imagine that if Putin is in a position to start further wars in Europe, America will be unaffected by that. That was a mistake the Americans made in 1914. They paid for it. It was a mistake they made in 1941 after Pearl Harbor, and they paid for it. And to repeat it again now, well, that would just be a catastrophe for America. We are linked together. We're bound together. Our fate and America's fate, the fate of the West, is interconnected. You can't give part of it up without losing the other half.